Page number 99 of Echoes. The Sound Machine is a story by Roald Dahl. It is a science fiction, but it also touches upon the important issues of environment. Okay. The story revolves around a person called Klausner. A person called Klausner. Klausner is a young scientist, but he is not a famous scientist. He is rather somebody who is pretty ordinary in terms of popularity or reputation. However, he discovers an instrument which is called the sound machine. He invents it, and it can catch certain sounds which are either ultrasonic or they are ultrasonic, means whose frequency is too high, or they are frequencies are too low. Infrasonic, right? Ultrasonic or infrasonic. Anyway, I will run through it very quickly. Page 99, fatafat follow karo. It was a warm summer evening and Klausner walked quickly through the front gate and around the side of the house and into the garden at the back. He went on down the garden until he came to a wooden shed, and he unlocked the door, went inside and closed the door behind him. So he's basically traveling, okay, between his room and the shed, which is in the garden. Outhouse, the shed outside the house. The interior of the shed was an unpainted room. Against one wall on the left, there was a long wooden workbench, and on it, among a littering of wires and batteries and small sharp tools, there stood a black box about 3 feet long, the shape of a child's coffin. So basically, these two paras set you up about the shed and the interiors. That he is basically somebody who is very meticulous about his work. There is the room which is unpainted. That tells you about the lack of concern. Like people who are, into science, they are not concerned about materialistic side of life, painting the room. So the room is unpainted. There is a workbench on which there are wires and batteries, and there is a long black box which will actually become the sound machine or sound box. Klausner moved across the room to the box. The top of the box was open, and he bent down and began to poke and peer inside it among a mass of different colored wires and silver tubes. So he is basically trying to work it. He picked up a piece of paper that lay beside the box, studied it carefully, put it down, peered inside the box, and started running his fingers along the wires, tugging gently at them to test the connections, glancing back at the paper and then into the box, and then at the paper again, checking each wire. So he's looking at the paper and then looking at the box, trying to work at the wire. He did this for perhaps an hour. First page, fourth para. Then he put a hand around to the front of the box, where there were 3 dials. So there are 3 knobs or dials, and he began to twiddle them. Okay, he began to twiddle them, watching at the same time the movement of the mechanism inside the box. All the while, he kept speaking softly to himself, nodding his head, smiling sometimes, his hands always moving, the fingers moving swiftly, deftly. Okay, deftly means skillfully, inside the box. His mouth twisting into curious shapes when a thing was delicate or difficult to do, saying yes, yes, and now this one, yes, yes, but is this right? Is it? Where is my diagram? So Klausner is basically working on the instrument all by himself. Next page, page 100. Yes, of course, yes, that's right. And now, good, yes. His concentration was intense. His movements were quick. There was an air of urgency about the way he worked, of breathlessness, of strong, suppressed excitement. So he's excited because he is on the edge of a discovery. Okay, he knows that agar sab kuch theek ho jaye, so he will invent the machine that can catch even those sounds which have so far remained inaccessible to human ears. Suddenly, he heard footsteps on the gravel path outside, and he straightened and turned swiftly as the door opened and a tall man came in. It was Scott. It was only Scott, the doctor. So, Scott is the second character. Scott is basically a doctor, and from the story, we can sort of deduce that Scott is a sort of his personal doctor, which means they are cordial to each other. Not very friendly, but cordial. Well, said the doctor. So this is where you hide yourself in the evenings. Hello, Scott, Klausner said. I happened to be passing, the doctor told him. So I dropped in to see how you were. There was no one in the house, so I came on down here. How is that throat of yours been behaving? It's all right, it's fine. Now that I'm here, I might as well have a look at it. Please don't trouble. I'm quite cured, I'm fine. So Klausner says that do not trouble yourself. I am quite fine. My throat is all right. This also tells us that Klausner is a very dedicated scientist. He does not want to be disturbed by small trivial things like a throat infection. Okay, so for any query? The doctor began to feel the tension in the room. He looked at the black box on the bench. Then he looked at the man. You have got your hat on, he said. Oh, have I? Klausner reached up, removed the hat, and put it on the bench. Now, in the Western society, a gentleman wears a hat when he steps out of the house. Okay, just like suppose if you are in the house, you are working, and if somebody says that you have got your shoes on, which means that you forgot to take your shoes off. So Klausner basically has forgotten to take his hat off, which also denotes the oblivious nature of a scientist. Scientists are sort of forgetful. Okay, it's not that their brain is dull. They are forgetful about those things of life which are irrelevant. Understood? The everyday aspect of life, they are forgetful about it. They are so involved in their work. Is this clear? So Dr. Scott points out that Klausner, your hat is still on. And then Klausner, realizing that he has still got his hat on, he takes it off. Clear? The doctor came up closer and bent down to look into the box. What's this, he said. Making a radio? No, just fooling around. It has got rather complicated looking innards. Innards means the inner parts, the wires. Yes. Klausner is tense and distracted. Klausner is distracted. He's not willing to engage into a conversation. Understood? Klausner is actually working on that instrument. So he is not encouraging the conversation to go on. Therefore, he is giving a very curt reply. Yes. What is it? The doctor asked. It's rather a frightening looking thing, isn't it? It's just an idea. Yes. It has to do with sound, that's all. Good heavens, man. Don't you get enough of that sort of thing all day in your work? I like sound. So Klausner simply says, I like sound. So it seems. The doctor went to the door, turned, and said, well, I won't disturb you. Glad your throat is not worrying you anymore. But he kept standing there, looking at the box, intrigued, means puzzled, by the remarkable complexity of its inside. Curious to know what this strange patient of his was up to. Please note the word strange patient. Even the doctor realizes that this patient is a strange man. Klausner is perceived by society as an abnormal or strange man. What is it really for? He asked. You have made me inquisitive. The doctor is suddenly stopping by the door and he's asking Klausner that I am feeling inquisitive, curious. What is this black box? Klausner looked down at the box, then at the doctor, and he reached up and began gently to scratch the lobe of his right ear. There was a pause. The doctor stood by the door, waiting, smiling. All right, I will tell you, if you are interested. There was another pause, and the doctor could see that Klausner was having trouble about how to begin. Now, Klausner is having trouble how to begin, how to introduce a subject, which actually is a very unheard of topic. If I have to tell you something which is ordinary, I can simply say very easily. But how do I introduce something which is an extraordinary thing? Okay. He was shifting from one foot to the other, tugging means pulling, at the lobe of his ear, looking at his feet. And then at last, slowly, he said, well, it's like this. The theory is very simple, really. The human ear, you know that it can't hear everything. There are sounds that are so low pitched or so high pitched that it can't hear them. Yes, the doctor said yes. Well, speaking very roughly, any note so high that it has more than 15,000 vibrations a second, we can't hear it. Dogs have better ears than us. You know, you can buy a whistle whose note is so high pitched that you can't hear it at all, but a dog can hear it. Yes, I have seen one, the doctor said. Of course you have. And up the scale, higher than the note of that whistle, there is another note, a vibration if you like, but I prefer to think of it as a note. You can't hear that one either. And above that, there is another and another rising right up the scale forever and ever and ever, an endless succession of notes, an infinity of notes. There is a note, if only our ears could hear it, so high that it vibrates 1,000,000 times a second, and another 1,000,000 times as high as that, and on, higher and higher, as far as numbers go, which is infinity, eternity beyond the stars. Now, just to refresh your physics, what is the meaning of pitch? Okay, or see, basically, we are talking of frequency, which means the number of vibrations per second. Okay, let us say, if I give a pen or pencil, let us say this is a pen. Okay, I vibrate it. So this is a pen. Now, in 1 second, let us say, if it is vibrating 2 times in 1 second, okay, if it is vibrating 2 times in 1 second, then its frequency ho gaya 2. If it is vibrating 10 times in 1 second, its frequency becomes 10. Okay, it is producing sound, but you cannot hear it. You will be able to hear the sound only if it begins to vibrate at least more than 20 times. That is why when you strike the string of a guitar or even a rubber band, if you strike it loudly, it will begin to produce a sound. It is still producing a sound, but we can't hear it. Okay, because our hearing range starts from 20 hertz. Similarly, we can't hear vibrations which are above 20,000 or above 15,000. 20,000 is the human range, but normally we can't hear above 15,000. You have to have a very sharp ear to hear sounds of above 15,000. Simply so vibrations. Agar koi cheez vibrate kar raha hai in 1 second more than 15,000 times, that is called a sound which is beyond our hearing range. On paper, a sound above 20,000 hertz cannot be heard by any human. That is ultrasonic sound. Therefore, he is inventing a machine that can catch those sounds, and those sounds can be converted or retuned. So he says that there can be sounds which can have infinite vibrations also. Okay, like a sound above 20,000. 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, 5 lakh, 6 lakh, 50 lakh. So there are infinite sounds which we cannot hear. Understood? There are infinite sounds we cannot hear. Next para. Klausner was becoming more and more animated every moment. He was a small, frail man, nervous and twitchy, with always moving hands. His large head inclined towards his left shoulder, as though his neck were not quite strong enough to support it rigidly. His face was smooth and pale, almost white, and the pale grey eyes that blinked and peered from behind a pair of steel spectacles were bewildering, unfocused, remote. So he had basically eyes that were remote. Eyes had a faraway look in them, as if the eyes were thinking of something else. He was a frail, nervous, twitchy little man, a moth of a man, dreamy. Moth means insect. Dreamy and distracted, suddenly fluttering and animated. And now the doctor, looking at that strange pale face and those pale grey eyes, felt that somehow there was about this little person a quality of distance, of immense, immeasurable distance, as though the mind were away, far away from where the body was. So basically what is happening here is that Klausner's body is here, but his mind is as if in some other way, other place, because he's so sunk in his thought. Yes.
So moth of a man.
I told you moth means insect. So moth of a man means he is as tiny as a moth. He's sort of as frail as a moth. Okay.
Pale face.
Frail. Frail. The doctor waited for him to go on. Klausner sighed and clasped his hands tightly together. You okay? I believe, he said, speaking more slowly now. So Klausner says, there is a whole world of sound about us all the time that we cannot hear. Now think of it in reality. We can hear maybe only a small percentage of sound. In reality, there are so many sounds we cannot hear. For example, we can hear the sound of a mosquito only when the mosquito is fluttering its wing at more than 20 vibrations per second. We cannot hear the sound of a mosquito all the time. We cannot hear the sound of, small, for example, you cannot hear the sound of a bird flapping its wings. You can hear the sound of air, but you cannot hear the metallic sound or the rough sound coming from the flapping of wings. Anyway, I believe, he said, speaking more slowly now, that there is a whole world of sound about us all the time that we cannot hear. It is possible that up there in those high-pitched, inaudible regions, there is a new exciting music being made with subtle harmonies, soft music, and fierce grinding discord. So maybe there is a soft musical sound somewhere. Or maybe there is a fierce grinding sound, fierce, rough sound. Like किसी भी तरह का sound. The sound can be metallic, like pleasant, or it can be rough. There are millions of sounds. Some can be pleasant,
Any kind of.
some can be unpleasant. जैसे कि पत्थर को रगड़ेंगे पत्थर में तो जो sound आएगा वो metallic नहीं होगा, वो discord होगा, rough. There can be so many sounds, pleasant as well as discord, which means musical as well as unpleasant. A music so powerful, maybe there is a music so powerful that it would drive us mad if only our ears were tuned to hear that sound. There may be anything. For all we know, there may be. Now the doctor is basically the face of an indifferent man.
Eh?
The doctor is indifferent.
मतलब?
Doctor को ये सब से कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ा. Doctor is least interested in physics.
Oh, machine मान लो.
The doctor is listening and he's saying, oh, acha, acha, yes, yes, okay, okay. The doctor does not show any kind of genuine interest. Okay, so the doctor is the face of an indifferent person.
So तो आस्ते.
Yes, the doctor said, but it is not very probable. Why not? Why not? Klausner pointed to a fly sitting on a small roll of copper. copper wire on the workbench. You see that fly? What sort of a noise is that fly making now? None that one can hear. But for all we know, the creature may be whistling like mad. Maybe this fly is whistling like mad on a very high note, or barking, or croaking, or singing a song. It has got a mouth, hasn't it? It has got a throat. So Klausner says that maybe this fly is actually whistling or croaking, but we cannot hear it. The doctor looked at the fly and he smiled. He was still standing by the door with his hand on the doorknob. Well, he said, so you are going to check up on that. Some time ago, Klausner said, I made a simple instrument that proved to me the existence of many odd, inaudible sounds. Often I have sat and watched the needle of my instrument recording the presence of sound, vibrations in the air when I myself could hear nothing. And those are the sounds I want to listen to. I want to know where they come from and who or what is making them. And that machine on the table there, the doctor said, is that going to allow you to hear these noises? It may, who knows? So far, I have had no luck, but I have made some changes in it. So Klausner says that he has tried to make some changes in the machine, and maybe the machine will help him catch or hear those sounds which are normally inaudible. Okay. Tonight, I am ready for another trial. This machine, he said, touching it with his hands, is designed to pick up sound vibrations that are too high-pitched for reception by the human ear and to convert them to a scale of audible tones. I tune it in almost like a radio. Like in a radio, we sort of move the needle and we try to hear the sound and then we stop there. So he says that in this machine, I can tune it like a radio. I can move the needle, and whenever there is a sound going at that frequency, I will pause the needle there and I will try to hear that sound. Let us say I'm moving the needle from 20,000 hertz to 1 lakh hertz. अब उसके बीच में अगर कोई आवाज कर रहा है, कोई insect, let us say the insect is screeching at a vibration of 80,000 hertz. So the needle, as it moves, it will begin to emit the sound at 80,000 pointer. Okay. How do you mean? How do you mean? It isn't complicated. Say, I wish to listen to the squeak of a bat. Now, bats have ultrasonic sound. That's a fairly high-pitched sound, about 30,000 vibrations a second. The average human ear can't hear it. Now, if there were a bat flying around this room and I tuned it to 30,000 on my machine, I would hear the squeaking of that bat very clearly. I would even hear the correct note, F sharp or B flat or whatever it might be. It is a note of the piano, like A, B, C, F or B, but merely at a much lower pitch. Don't you understand? The doctor looked at the long black coffin box. And you are going to try it tonight? Yes. Well, I wish you luck. So the doctor is very indifferent. He does not show excitement. He says, well, good luck. I wish you luck. He glanced at his watch. My goodness, he said, I must fly. Goodbye and thank you for telling me. I must call again sometime and find out what happened. The doctor went out and closed the door behind him. For a while longer, Klausner fussed about with the wires in the black box. Then he straightened up and in a soft, excited whisper said, now we will try again. We will take it out into the garden this time. So now Klausner is all alone. Klausner decides to take the box into the garden. And then perhaps the reception will be better. Lift it up now carefully. Oh my God, it's heavy. He carried the box to the door, found that he couldn't open the door without putting it down. Carried it back, put it on the bench, opened the door, and then carried it with some difficulty into the garden. He placed the box carefully on a small wooden table that stood on the lawn. He returned to the shed and fetched a pair of earphones. So now he has put the black box on the garden on a bench. He plugged the wire connections from the earphones into the machine. So he plugs the earphone into the machine and put the earphones over his ears. The movements of his hands were quick and precise. He was excited. Now he's excited and breathed loudly and quickly through his mouth. He kept on talking to himself with little words of comfort and encouragement, as though he were afraid. Now he's afraid on both accounts. Afraid that the machine might not work, and afraid also of what might happen if it did. I find that this is a very beautiful line, a very great portrayal of his mental state. He's so nervous that he's afraid that what if the machine does not work? My hard work, my efforts, they will all go down the drain. But he's also excited and nervous and afraid that what I might hear if the machine does work. Clear? Clear? Page 104, last para. He stood there in the garden beside the wooden table, so pale, small and thin, that he looked like an ancient, consumptive, bespectacled child. Okay, consumptive means somebody who is affected with a disease like tuberculosis. It is written there. The sun had gone down. There was no wind, no sound at all. From where he stood, he could see over a low fence into the next garden. So nearby there is a garden. Now what will happen? Now suddenly he will hear a sound like a cry of pain, like ah. And he will look over and he will find that his neighbor, an elderly woman, she actually just trimmed a rose plant. Is this clear? So that sound, that cry of pain was coming from the plant that was cut or trimmed. The sun had gone down. There was no wind, no sound at all. From where he stood, he could see over a low fence into the next garden. And there was a woman walking down the garden with a flower basket on her arm. He watched her for a while without thinking about her at all. Then he turned to the box on the table and pressed a switch on its front. He put his left hand on the volume control and his right hand on the knob. There are too many details actually. That moved a needle across a large center dial, like the wavelength dial of a radio. The dial was marked with many numbers in a series of bands, starting at 15,000 vibrations and going up to 1 lakh. Is it 1 lakh?
Yes.
104, I forgot to say. Anyway, you should have told me now. Go to page 105 anyway. And now he was bending forward over the machine. His head was cocked to one side in a tense, listening attitude. Page 105.
105 8 नहीं है नहीं 8 है तो
His right hand was beginning to turn the knob. The needle was traveling slowly across the dial. So slowly, doesn't matter. So slowly he could hardly see it move. And in the earphones, he could hear a faint, spasmodic crackling. So spasmodic means something brief and irregular. Behind this crackling sound, he could hear a distant humming tone. There is a humming tone coming in the background, which was the noise of the machine itself. But that was all. As he listened, he became conscious of a curious sensation, a feeling that his ears were stretching out away from his head, that each ear, he felt that each ear was connected to his head by a thin, stiff wire, like a tentacle, tentacles of octopus. He felt that his ears, the wires have become like tentacles and they are reaching out to some strange areas. And that the wires were lengthening, that the ears were going up and down, up and up towards a secret and forbidden territory, a dangerous ultrasonic region where ears had never been before and had no right to be. The little needle crept slowly across the dial, and suddenly he heard a shriek, a frightful, piercing shriek, a scream. And he jumped and dropped his hands, catching hold of the edge of the table. He stared around him. Suddenly he heard the shriek. The sound of shriek was the sound of the rose plant. So he jumped, dropped his hands, catching hold of the edge of the table. He stared around him as if expecting to see the person. So he stared around that, who is the person who had shrieked? There was no one in sight except the woman in the garden next door. And it was certainly not she. She was bending down, cutting yellow roses and putting them in her basket. Again it came, a throatless, inhuman shriek, sharp and short, very clear and cold. The note itself possessed a minor metallic quality. The sound of the scream was kind of a metallic quality that he had never heard before. Klausner looked around him, searching instinctively for the source of the noise. The woman next door was the only living thing in sight. He saw her reach down, take a rose stem in the fingers of one hand and cut the stem with a pair of scissors. Again, he heard the scream. It came at the exact moment when the rose stem was cut. At this point, the woman straightened up, put the scissors in the basket with the roses, and turned to walk away. So at that point, the woman was walking away, and then he called her. Mrs. Saunders, Klausner shouted, his voice shrill with excitement. Oh, Mrs. Saunders. And looking round, see, do you have page 106? And looking round, the woman saw her neighbor. The woman saw her neighbor. Who is her neighbor? Klausner. Standing on his lawn, a fantastic, warm, arm-waving little person with a pair of earphones on his head, calling to her in a voice so high and loud that she became alarmed. Cut another one. Please cut another one quickly. She stood still, staring at him. Why, Mr. Klausner? What's the matter? Please do as I ask. Cut just one more rose. Now see, if you are trimming the roses and somebody comes and says, please cut one more rose, you will definitely feel that the person is insane. The person is mad. So Mrs. Saunders had always believed her neighbor to be a rather peculiar person. Now it seemed that he had gone completely crazy. She wondered whether she should run into the house and fetch her husband. No, she thought, no, he is harmless. I will just humor him. I will just play around with him. So she also says, certainly, Mr. Klausner, if you like, she said. She took her scissors from the basket, bent down, and snipped another rose. Again, Klausner heard that frightful, throatless shriek in the earphones. Again, it came at the exact moment the rose stem was cut. He took off the earphones and ran to the fence that separated the two gardens. All right, that's enough. No more, please, no more. Now suddenly he's pained by the sound of the rose, and he tells Mrs. Saunders to cut no more. The woman stood there, a yellow rose in one hand, clippers in the other, looking at him. I am going to tell you something, Mrs. Saunders, he said, something that you won't believe. He put his hands on top of the fence and peered at her, looked at her intently, through his thick spectacles. You have this evening cut a basketful of roses. You have, with a sharp pair of scissors, cut through the stems of living things. And each rose that you cut screamed in the most terrible way. Did you know that, Mrs. Saunders? So he's telling Mrs. Saunders that, did you know that each rose screamed? No, she said, I certainly didn't know that. It happens to be true, he said. He was breathing rather rapidly, but he was trying to control his excitement. I heard them shrieking each time you cut one. I heard the cry of pain. You have page 107? Yeah. I heard the cry of pain, a very high-pitched sound, approximately 132,000 vibrations a second. You couldn't possibly have heard it yourself, but I heard it. Obviously, she thinks that he pagal ho gaya, but she is again trying to humor him. Did you really, Mr. Klausner? She decided that she would make a dash. Okay, dash means run for the house in about 5 seconds. You might say, he went on, that a rose bush has no nervous system to feel with. You might say that a rose bush has no throat to cry with. You would be right. It hasn't. Not like ours anyway. But how do you know, Mrs. Saunders? And then he leaned far over the fence and spoke in a fierce whisper. How do you know that a rose bush doesn't feel as much pain when someone cuts its stem? You would, as someone cuts off with a garden shears. How do you know that? It's alive, isn't it? Yes, Mr. Klausner. Oh, yes. And good night. Quickly she turned and ran up the garden to her house. Klausner went back to the table. He put on the earphones and stood for a while listening. He could still hear the faint crackling sound and the humming noise of the machine, but nothing more. He bent down and took hold of a small white daisy. You know, daisy is a flower. He took hold of a small white daisy flower growing on the lawn. He took it between the thumb and the forefinger, and slowly pulled it upward like this and sideways until the stem broke. From the moment that he started pulling to the moment when the stem broke, he distinctly heard in the earphones a faint, high-pitched cry, curiously inanimate. It is not a sound he could associate with any creature or any human. It sounded very inanimate, as if coming from an object. He took another daisy and did it again. Once more he heard the cry, but he wasn't so sure now that it expressed pain. No, it wasn't pain, it was surprise. Or was it? So Clausen is thinking that, is this the cry of pain or is it a cry of surprise? It didn't really express any of the feelings or emotions known to a human being. It was just a cry, a neutral, stony cry, a single, emotionless note, expressing nothing. It had been the same with the roses. He had been wrong in calling it a cry of pain. A flower probably didn't feel pain. It felt something else, which we didn't know about, something called toin or spurl or pinnockment or anything you like. So he's saying that maybe the flowers did not feel pain the way maybe a flower felt some other kind of emotion. We can call it spurl or pinnockment or toin or something else. Page 108. इसका फोटो डाल दो quickly. Page 108. Don't worry, I will finish it today. I will take another 20 minutes. I will take another 15 minutes or so.
नहीं आज नहीं हो पाएगा।
I just तुम चले हो ना, I'm not saying what's the recording I don't care. वहाँ तो having annual में तो doesn't matter.
किसका annual नहीं है, sir?
तुम्हें जाना बचले आना प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. I'm not understand. I understand, but I understand वो जाना. Anyway, page 108. He stood up and removed the earphones. It was getting dark, and he could see pricks of light shining in the windows of the houses all around him. Carefully, he picked up the black box from the table, carried it into the shed, वो अंदर वापस ले जा रहा है उसको, and put it into the on the workbench. Then he went out, locked the door behind him, and walked up to the house. Now, the next morning, he will wake up and he will call his friend, Dr. Scott. Okay, first, he will go and try it. He will give it a try on a tree. The next morning, Klausner was up as soon as it was light. He dressed and went straight to the shed. He picked up the machine and carried it outside, clasping it to his chest with both hands, walking unsteadily under its weight. Now he will take the machine to the park. Okay, now he will take the machine to the park. You can leave, Mudita, if you want.
Sir, park.
He will now take the machine to the park to repeat the experiment on a large tree. Understood? So far, the previous evening, he tried it out on the rose plant and daisy plant. So अब वो park में जा रहा है, he is taking the machine to the park. There he paused and looked around him. Then he went on until he came to a large tree, a beech tree. A beech tree, याद रखो, MCQ में आ सकता है.
So
Beech tree is the name of a tree. And he placed the machine on the ground close to the trunk of the tree. Quickly, he went back to the house and got an axe from the coal cellar. Axe from the coal cellar, जहाँ कोल रखा जाता है. Cellar is the small like storehouse where coals are kept. And carried it across the road into the park. He put the axe on the ground beside the tree. Then he looked around him again, peering nervously through his thick glasses in every direction. There was no one about. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. He put the earphones on his head and switched on the machine. He listened for a moment to the faint, familiar humming sound. Then he picked up the axe, took a stance. He took a stance means took a position. Now he's going to swing the axe on the tree. So he took a stance with his legs wide apart and swung the axe as hard as he could at the base of the trunk. The blade cut deep into the wood and stuck there. And at the instant of impact, he heard a most extraordinary noise in the earphones. So the moment the blade hit the tree, he heard the most extraordinary noise. It was a new noise, unlike any he had heard before. A harsh, noteless, enormous sound noise, a growling sound, low-pitched, screaming sound, not quick and short like the noise of the roses, but drawn out like a sob, lasting for fully a minute. Loudest at the moment when the axe struck, fading gradually, fainter and fainter until it was gone. Now the sound of the rose plant was like this, like it was short. And the sound of the tree is longer. And it is fading, like the sound which is increasing and then it fades. Understood. Klausner stared in horror. Klausner stared in horror at the place where the blade of the axe had sunk into the wood flesh of the tree. Then gently he took the axe handle, worked the blade loose and threw the thing on the ground. With his fingers, he touched the gash. The gash means the wound that the axe had made in the wood, touching the edges of the gash, trying to press them together. So he's trying to press the wound together to close the wound. And he kept saying, "Tree, oh tree, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, but it will heal. It will heal fine." For a while, he stood there with his hands upon the trunk of the great tree. Then suddenly he turned away and hurried off out of the park, across the road, through the front gate, and back into his house. He went to the telephone, consulted the book, dialed a number and waited. He held the receiver tightly in his left hand and tapped the table impatiently with his right. He heard the telephone buzzing at the other end. So he is calling his friend Dr. Scott. he will tell Dr. Scott to come over. He heard the telephone buzzing at the other end, and then the click of a lifted receiver and a man's voice, a sleepy voice saying, "Hello, yes." "Dr. Scott," he said. "Yes, speaking." "Dr. Scott, you must come at once quickly, please." "Who is it speaking?" "Klausner here. And you remember what I told you last night about my experience with sound and how I hoped I might?" "Yes, yes, of course. But what's the matter? Are you ill?" "No, I'm not ill, but it's 6:30 in the morning," the doctor said. "And you call me, but you are not ill. Please come. Come quickly. I want someone to hear it. It is driving me mad. I can't believe it." The doctor heard the frantic, almost hysterical note in the man's voice, the same note he was used to hearing in the voices of people who called up and said, "There has been an accident, come quickly." So the doctor said slowly, "You really want me to get out of bed and come over now?" "Yes, now, at once, please." "All right then, I will come." So now the doctor is going to come. Page 110. You have it? Klausner sat down beside the telephone and waited. Klausner sat down, page 110. Klausner sat down beside the telephone and waited. He tried to remember what the shriek of the tree had sounded like, but he couldn't. He could remember only that it had been enormous and frightful, and that it had made him feel sick with horror. He tried to imagine what sort of noise a human would make if he had to stand anchored, which means rooted to the ground, while someone deliberately swung a small sharp thing at his leg. Now he's imagining himself to be the tree. That what if somebody had swung an axe on my leg? So that the blade cut in deep and wedged itself, stuck itself in the cut. Same sort of noise, perhaps. No, quite different. The noise of the tree was worse than any known human noise because of that frightening, toneless, throatless quality. So he's suffering from guilt. Okay, the guilt that he has hurt a tree. He began to wonder about other living things, and he thought immediately of a field of wheat standing up straight and yellow and alive, with the mower, the machine going through it, cutting the stems, 500 stems a second, every second. Oh my God, what would that noise be like? 500 wheat plants screaming together, and every second, another 500 being cut and screaming. And no, he thought, I do not want to go to a wheat field with my machine. I would never eat bread after that. But what about potatoes and cabbages and carrots and onions? What about apples? Apples are all right. They fall off naturally when they are ripe. Apples are all right if you let them fall off instead of tearing them from the tree branch. But not vegetables. Not a potato, for example. A potato would surely shriek. So would a carrot and an onion and a cabbage. Now Klausner is thinking that I should give up eating wheat or vegetables because we hurt or cause injury to the plants when we consume them, when we tear them off. He heard the click of the front gate latch. So the doctor has arrived. And he jumped up and went out and saw the tall doctor coming down the patch, little black bag in hand. Well, the doctor said, well, what's all the trouble? Come with me, doctor. I want you to hear it. I called you because you are the only one I have told. It's over the road in the park. Will you come now? The doctor looked at him. He seemed calmer now. There was no sign of madness or hysteria. He was merely disturbed and excited. They went across the road into the park, and Klausner led the way to the great beech tree, at the foot of which stood the long black coffin box of the machine and the axe. Why did you bring it out here? The doctor asked. I wanted a tree. There aren't any big trees in the garden. So Klausner says that in the garden there aren't trees. There aren't any big trees. That is why I had to bring the box in the park. And why the axe? You will see in a moment. But now please put on these earphones and listen. So Klausner tells the doctor that I will swing the axe and I want you to listen. Listen carefully and tell me afterwards precisely what you hear. I want to make quite sure. The doctor smiled and took the earphones and put them over his ears. Klausner bent down and flicked the switch on the panel of the machine. Then he picked up the axe and he took his stance with his legs wide apart, ready to swing. For a moment, he paused. Can you hear anything? He said to the doctor. Can I what? Can you hear anything? Just a humming noise. Klausner stood there with the axe in his hands, trying to bring himself to swing. But the thought of the noise that the tree would make made him pause again. So Klausner is showing a sort of a human side. He is hesitating. He is afraid to cause injury to the tree. What are you waiting for? The doctor asked. Nothing, Klausner said. And then he lifted the axe and swung it at the tree. And as he swung, he thought he could swear, he felt a movement of the ground on which he stood. He felt a slight shifting of the earth beneath his feet, as though the roots of the tree were moving underneath the soil. He could hear the roots moving. You know, the roots are sort of moving because they can anticipate that an axe is coming. But it was too late to check the blow. So it was too late. He had already swung his arm. It was too late to control the blow. And the axe blade struck the tree and wedged deep into the wood. So he basically hit the tree. At that moment, high overhead, there was the cracking sound of wood splintering. So ऊपर wood splinter होता है, which means the wood basically breaks, and the swishing sound of leaves brushing against other leaves. And they both looked up, and the doctor cried, "Watch out, run, man, quickly run." So basically a part of the branches crashing down. The doctor had ripped off the earphones and was running away fast. But Klausner stood there spellbound, staring up at the great branch, 60 feet long at least, that was bending slowly downward, breaking and crackling and splintering at its thickest point, where it joined the main trunk of the tree. The branch came crashing down and Klausner leapt aside just in time. The branch fell upon the machine and smashed it into pieces. Great heavens, shouted the doctor as he came running back. That was a near one. I thought it had got you. Now please understand, nature had destroyed the machine because the machine was trying to discover the secrets of nature. You can take it this way. Okay. Klausner was staring at the tree. His large head was leaning to one side, and upon his smooth white face, there was a tense, horrified expression. Slowly he walked up to the tree and gently he pulled out the blade loose from the trunk. Did you hear it? He said, turning to the doctor. His voice was barely audible. The doctor was still out of breath from the running and excitement. Hear what? In the earphones, did you hear anything when the axe struck? The doctor began to rub the back of his neck. Well, as a matter of fact, he paused and frowned and bit his lower lip. No, I'm not sure. I couldn't be sure. I don't suppose I had the earphones on for more than a second after the axe struck. So the doctor says that I did not hear any sound. The doctor basically removed the earphones and ran away the moment the axe struck. Yes, but what did you hear? I don't know, the doctor said. I don't know what I heard. Probably the noise of the branch breaking. He was speaking rather rapidly, irritably. Page 113. What did it sound like? Klausner leaned forward, slightly staring hard at the doctor. Exactly what did it sound like? Oh, hell, the doctor said. I don't know really. I was more interested in getting out of the way. Let's leave it. Dr. Scott, what did it sound like? For God's sake, how could I tell? What with half the tree falling on me and having to run for my life? The doctor certainly seemed nervous. Klausner had sensed it now. He stood quite still, staring at the doctor, and for fully half a minute, he did not speak. The doctor moved his feet, shrugged his shoulders, and half turned to go. Well, he said, we had better get back. Look, said the little man, Klausner, and now his smooth white face became suddenly suffused with color. Look, he said, you stitch this up. So he's telling the doctor to stitch the wound on the tree. He pointed to the last gash, the last cut that the axe had made in the tree trunk. You stitch this up quickly. Don't be silly, the doctor said. You do as I say. Stitch it up. Klausner was gripping the axe handle and he spoke softly, in a curious, almost a threatening tone. Don't be silly, the doctor said. I can't stitch through wood. Come on, let's go back. So you can't stitch through wood? No, of course not. Have you got any iodine in your bag? So Klausner is very concerned about the health of the tree. He tells the doctor that if you can't stitch, at least apply some iodine. You know, the way we apply Dettol. Apply some antiseptic. Have you got any iodine in your bag? What if I have? Then paint the cut with iodine. Paint means smear. Apply the cut with iodine. It will sting, but that can't be helped. Klausner is even concerned about the fact that if we apply iodine, it will sting. Yani, the tree will feel the stinging sensation, but it can't be helped. So here you find the humanitarian side of Klausner. Now look, the doctor said, and again he turned as if to go. Let's not be ridiculous. Let's get back to the house and then paint the cut with iodine. The doctor hesitated. He saw Klausner's hands tightening on the handle of the axe. He decided that this is his only alternative was to run away fast. And he certainly wasn't going to do that. The doctor felt either I should run away or I should do what he says. Now the doctor was too lazy to run away early in the morning. So he thought, fine, I will just do it. All right, I will paint it with iodine. He got his black bag, which was lying on the grass about 10 yards away, opened it and took out a bottle of iodine and some cotton wool. He went up to the tree trunk, uncorked the bottle, tipped some of the iodine onto the cotton wool, bent down and began to dab it into the cut. He kept one eye on the Klausner, who was standing motionless with the axe in his hands, watching him. Make sure you get it right. Yes, the doctor said. Now do the other one, the one just above it. The doctor did as he was told. There you are, he said. It's done. He straightened up and surveyed his work in a very serious manner. That should do nicely. Klausner came closer and gravely examined the two wounds. Yes, he said, nodding his huge head slowly up and down. Yes, that will do nicely. He stepped back a pace. You will come and look at them again tomorrow? So Klausner says, the doctor, will you again come tomorrow and apply the iodine? Oh yes, the doctor said, of course. And put some more iodine on? If necessary, yes. Thank you, doctor, Klausner said, and he nodded his head again, and he dropped the axe, and all at once he smiled, a wild, excited smile. And quickly the doctor went over to him, and gently he took him by the arm, and he said, come on, we must go now. And suddenly they were walking away. The two of them walking silently, rather hurriedly, across the park, over the road, back to the house. Now the question is, why did Klausner smile towards the end? Klausner smiled towards the end because in a way he realized that I cannot win over nature. Science cannot win over nature. Nature itself has destroyed the machine that was trying to penetrate its guarded secrets. So in a way, the story is a very nice combination of a science fiction as well as a story which is about man-nature conflict.
So understood. The fire maybe the man-nature conflict.
In a way. But here, man is trying to destroy nature, which is how that is the only difference. Okay.